There have always been mixed sentiments about the Vietnam War among the American people. That's the reason some of its greatest heroes have gone unnoticed by the public. The Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, MACV SOG, was one of those operations units that never received the credit it deserved. The Covert Ops unit had excellent scouts, raiders, and rescuers who joined the special operation voluntarily, and the confidential group had a casualty rate of 100%. Stay with us till the end as we tell you about this Covert Operations unit that you never heard of. The beginning. As the United States military presence in Vietnam rose with more conventional troops, so did the secret war. In 1964, the Pentagon developed a highly classified special operations group to oppose the Viet Cong's guerrilla campaign raging inside South Vietnam, which was backed by the North Vietnamese Army. The MACV SOG group was charged with fighting the enemy wherever they were, specializing in cross-border operations in Cambodia, Laos, and North Vietnam, where U.S. troops were not supposed to be. The MACV SOG proved to be an instant success, as all these places were home to the Secret Unified Special Forces Group. SOG was made up of Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Recon Marines, and Air Commandos, and it also collaborated with the intelligence community. SOG did not wear or carry any identification when operating outside of a legally declared conflict, as the service was strictly confidential. Plans and targets. An Army colonel known as Chief SOG was the leader of the operation, which was a reference to the organization's predominance of Green Berets. They divided their targets into 3 geographical sections: Command and Control North, CCN, Command and Control Central, CCC, and Control and Command South, CCS. The unit's service was extremely selective, and they only recruited from special operations troops, but everyone had to volunteer due to the inherent risk. Around 3.2 million Americans served in the Vietnam War, and only 2,000 of them served in SOG, with 400 to 600 of them in charge of recon and direct combat missions. Everyone who served in SOG was either wounded or died, with the majority of them being wounded many times. In South Vietnam and across the border, the SOG mostly conducted reconnaissance and direct action missions, such as ambushes. Cross-border recon missions frequently resulted in spectacular gunfights, as small SOG units were harmed and pursued by vastly superior enemy forces. The recon team was mostly extracted when they were under fire and were seconds away from being overrun. The Secret War. SOG executed some of the most audacious special operations in U.S. history during its 8-year secret war from 1964 to 1972, laying the groundwork for the formation of the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, and U.S. Special Operations Command, SOCOM. The Pentagon was forced to build a similar unit 8 years after MACV SOG was dissolved, after the failure of Operation Eagle Claw to rescue American hostages held in Iran. The Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, was formed. SOG operations were known for their high danger level, whether it was when an SOG detachment went after 3 NVA divisions or when a reinforced SOG company traveled deep into Laos to assist the CIA. This was reflected in SOG's almost 100% casualty rate. Moreover, most of the SOG operations took place in areas where U.S. troops were not intended to be. No American forces were stationed outside of South Vietnam, according to successive U.S. governments. As a result, SOG commandos wore no name tags, ranks, or other markings that could be used to identify them as Americans. They didn't even have serial numbers on their firearms. The unit took part in most of the major campaigns of the Vietnam War, including Operation Steel Tiger, Operation Tiger Hound, the Tet Offensive, Operation Commando Hunt, the Cambodian Campaign, Operation Lam Son 719, and the Easter Offensive, as well as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which prompted increased American involvement. The unit also carried out strategic reconnaissance missions, captured enemy prisoners, rescued downed pilots, conducted prisoner-of-war rescue operations throughout Southeast Asia, and conducted clandestine agent team activities and psychological operations. The organization's purpose was to carry out an enhanced campaign of harassment, diversion, political pressure, prisoner capture, physical destruction, information gathering, propaganda generation, and resource diversion against the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. These actions were carried out in an attempt to persuade North Vietnam to stop funding the Viet Cong insurgency in South Vietnam. Colonel Clyde Russell, the initial leader of SOG, had trouble forming an organization with which to carry out his goals since U.S. Special Forces were unprepared, both doctrinally and organizationally at the time. The Special Forces' goal at the time was to perform guerrilla operations behind enemy lines in the case of a conventional invasion, not to conduct agent, maritime, or psychological operations. The unit got its operations underway after a sluggish and uncertain start, but did way more than that when the things got going. The Twin Islands. In 1964, 4 SOG boats blasted 2 islands off the coast of North Vietnam, Hon Mi and Hon Nhu, on the night of July 30 to 31st. It was the first time SOG ships shelled North Vietnamese coastal infrastructure from the sea. The warship USS Maddox commenced an electronic intelligence gathering mission off the coast of North Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin the following afternoon. Psychological operations against North Vietnam were the final component of SOG's initial missions. During searches of coastal vessels, the unit's naval arm captured northern fishermen and imprisoned them on Cu Lao Cham Island off the coast of Da Nang, South Vietnam. The Pentagon approved MACV SOG to begin cross-border operations in Laos, in areas adjacent to South Vietnam's western border, on September 21, 1965. Since 1964, MACV has requested permission to mount such a mission in an attempt to put boots on the ground in a reconnaissance capacity to observe the enemy logistical system, known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, firsthand. MACV had launched a strategic bombardment of the logistics system in southern Laos through the 7th Air Force in April and had been given authority to launch an all-Vietnamese recon campaign that had proven to be a fiasco. The use of U.S. forces was deemed necessary and SOG was given the go-ahead. The cross-border missions. The MACV SOG launched its first cross-border mission on October 18, 1965, targeting Target D1, a suspected truck terminus on Laotian Route 165, 15 miles inside the nation. The mission was considered a success when 88 bombing sorties were launched against the terminal, resulting in numerous secondary explosions, but it also resulted in the death of Special Forces Captain Larry Thorne, who died in a helicopter crash. Over the next 8 years, MACV SOG initiated a series of operations that would continue to expand in size and complexity. Initially, a command and control headquarters in Da Nang was in charge of the Laotian operations. The teams, which usually consisted of 3 Americans and 3 to 12 indigenous mercenaries, were dispatched from forward operating bases along the border. The aim of the crew was to infiltrate the target region, gather intelligence, and stay unnoticed for as long as possible. If the need or chance to hit profitable targets arose, communication was maintained with a forward air control aircraft, which would communicate with USAF fighter bombers. Close to the enemy. Beginning in 1966, MACV noticed that the North Vietnamese were utilizing neutral Cambodia as part of their logistical system, funneling soldiers and supplies to the battle's southernmost front. SOG also carried out PAVN prisoner snatching missions behind enemy lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Capturing enemy soldiers was always the team's secondary purpose when the opportunity arose, owing to important knowledge gathered about PAVN troop movements, number, and base locations, regardless of the team's primary mission. The formation of exploitation troops, which could either reinforce the teams in times of need or launch their own raids against the trail, bolstered the MACV SOG reconnaissance units. They were made up of 2 to 3 Haymaker battalions that were subdivided into hatchet forces, which were then subdivided into Hornet platoons. The commanders and non-commissioned officers of these troops were all Americans who had been deployed to snakebite units from the 1st Special Forces Group on Okinawa on a temporary basis. Setbacks. 1968 was a difficult year for MACV and SOG. The largest PAVN Viet Cong onslaught in the battle occurred along with the collapse of SOG's northern operations, despite the fact that the Tet Offensive was limited and pushed back with significant deaths. The American people and administration had irreversibly turned against an open-ended commitment by the U.S. President Johnson looked for a way out of the commitment he had made previously. The U.S. finally realized its predicament, although late in the political process. Johnson offered the bait of ending all U.S. operations against North Vietnam north of the 20th parallel in an attempt to resume peace talks with Hanoi. Hanoi had simply asked for an end to the air campaign against the North, but Johnson went much farther, ordering a halt to all overt and covert actions against the North. The agent team, propaganda, and aerial operations of the MACV SOG were all put on hold as a result of this instruction. Recognition. Although there had been a few minor media leaks during the battle, the U.S. military and MACV SOG soldiers kept a tight lid on information about the unit's operations and presence. Any news that came out was largely false and readily dismissed. More detailed evidence came from the Pentagon Papers, which included documentation from the early days of the operation, as well as testimony from ex-SOG personnel during the 1970s bombing campaigns in Laos and Cambodia. The citations issued for the granting of the Medal of Honor to MACV SOG members were one early source of information, albeit they were never recognized as such. On SOG operations, 1 U.S. Air Force helicopter pilot, 2 U.S. Navy SEALs, 1 U.S. Army medic, and 9 Green Berets received the nation's highest award, the Distinguished Service Cross. The nation's second highest award for valor was awarded to 22 other soldiers of the unit. During a ceremony at Fort Bragg, North Carolina on April 4, 2001, the U.S. Army officially recognized its covert warriors' valor, honesty, and devotion to duty by awarding the unit a Presidential Unit Citation. That's it from today's video. We hope you enjoyed the content of the video as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Make sure to like the video and share it with friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more quality content in the future.